Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tulley, President and Executive Writing Coach with Defend and Publish, and welcome to episode 106, Difficult Dissertation Chairs. Yeah, there's a lot to say about this particular topic, but this was actually an episode I had planned to do a little bit later this semester, but the clients that are coming in from the end of December to January, many of them are coming to us with this specific problem, and I just decided I didn't want to wait to make this type of an episode. So today's episode is just going to be some strategies that we've worked with clients to help them navigate some difficult dissertation chair situations. And so I'm just going to throw some of those ideas out there because if you're listening to this podcast, this might be something that applies to you. And honestly, many of these strategies can work in other kinds of difficult situations where you need something from someone and they're not giving it to you for some reason. So let me give you a couple of scenarios that have happened with clients and our company recently. The first one that I've gotten, and I've gotten this a lot, which is probably the number one reason we get PhD students. If we don't get them because they're stuck, we get them because for some reason their dissertation chair is a problem. And so, certainly there are many lovely dissertation chairs out there. I'm extremely thankful to my dissertation chair, Dr. Christine Blair. I've talked about her before on the podcast, how she was a wonderful mentor for me and a fabulous chair. And the more that I hear about from clients, I'm realizing that was, very, very lucky that I got matched in that kind of a way. But in any event, we still have to think about what to do if you're in a scenario where maybe you were not that lucky. So here's a couple of scenarios. One client I have right now, they have a chair that essentially changes their mind about what they want the dissertation student to do. So the student will go to a meeting, the chair will say, okay, do A, B, and C. And then the student will do it. And then they go to the meeting and then the chair says, oh, I really don't like B. Let's get rid of that. Maybe let's tweak C. And how about doing X, Y, and Z? And then the next meeting, it's, let's do M and H and L. And why is A in here? That makes no sense. And so it's basically a moving meeting or a moving bar about what the student needs to be accomplished to get finished. And with this particular client, they had already paid for 3 semesters of this type of cycling through, and then just never getting anywhere because the project, had some problems. And I will say there is one caveat to this particular project. Many dissertation students will write a dissertation, get halfway through, or more than halfway through and realize, oh, my methodology was a real problem here, or I should have asked those questions in my research, or I don't really have the right kind of theoretical framework. This one isn't really as good as it could be. Sometimes we just want to think about getting this project completed. We always hear that kind of advice that best dissertation is a done dissertation, and that may be. But sometimes there's these real obstacles to getting writing completed. So dissertation chairs are not always wrong when they're pointing out, hey, you've got some major work to do here. It is going to take a long time for you to untangle, these pieces. That said, a lot of chairs do change their mind a lot, and sometimes that is a result of seeing what the student did in response. And so I see this with first year writing students where I'll say, hey, I really need you to explain a little bit more about concept X and tie in this source. And then I have to see what the student's going to do to know how to advise them further. We're not really talking about that kind of scenario. We're just talking about a dissertation chair who's really not sure what they want, and they keep changing the rules all the time for the student. So what is there that needs to happen? And so with that scenario, the advice that we gave, there's actually a couple of pieces. One was that the student took notes with the advisor, and then before they left a meeting, they made a checklist together of what had to happen. And then the student worked on those pieces and came back to the meeting with a completed checklist, and even went so far as to say, okay, you wanted me to work in this source. That is now on page 39. It's in the second paragraph. You wanted me to reframe the concept of ABC. I did that on pages 16, 32, 51, and so on. And so they basically made it so the chair could then not argue back and say, well, I didn't want that, because they made the checklist together. So that was a really effective strategy that worked with one client. And then a similar situation where a chair kept kind of moving the bar all the time. Another thing that happened was that We had another client that basically reiterated what the chair said back to them at the end as kind of a recap, so a close to their meeting. They had a meeting every 2 weeks. They said, all right, these are the 3 things we talked about in this meeting. You want me to do number 1, number 2, and number 3. There's nothing else I need to do other than 1, 2, and 3. And they kind of reiterated that language back to the chair. So that way the chair could not, they kind of heard it like, this is all I need to do. So it kind of forces some of those chairs that might be indecisive or just change their mind, or just for whatever reason, they don't, maybe they're not reading projects carefully enough. It kind of forces them to agree to what the bar is, so that way it can't be moved the next time. It's not totally foolproof, but at least with these 2 clients, it was something that helped. And both clients admitted when they went to meetings, they took notes, but they just kind of scribbled down what their dissertation advisor said, and they didn't kind of sum up the meeting or take control of the meeting. And I think this is something that a lot of dissertation students do. They go and they expect the chair to be the teacher, and so they don't really have control over the situation. That's true to some extent. Dissertation chairs control people's destinies in many, many, many cases. But at the same time, part of the PhD is being an independent scholar and understanding how to negotiate some of those things. So having an agenda going into a meeting and asking about specific things is always a good idea. We've recommended that in previous podcast episodes. But in this case, I think that's a really good route to go, is to kind of reframe something as a checklist. You want me to do A, B, and C? All right, I'm going to do A, B, and C for you. And especially if you can tell them where those things are. I had another client several years ago that did this strategy where they actually highlighted in their chapters everything that the chair wanted them to change, and they highlighted them all in yellow. And they said they did it on a way to say, look, I saved you time. You don't have to reread the whole thing. Check out what I did on page 18. It's in yellow at the bottom. So that might be a way that you can get around some of those indecisive issues. So that was the first scenario. A second scenario was that the chair never gave feedback at all. So basically the whole process is stalled many, many times because the chair keeps promising they're going to do feedback. The chair might even be meeting with the dissertation student, but ultimately the student is kind of sitting around and waiting on feedback, and they're worried at the end that the chair is going to say, oh, you have to do 200 things, where they had 3 years of working together. And so in this case, there's a couple of different ways that this can happen. I advocate, and this is just how I would play it, just based on multiple times hearing this with clients, but if it was me, I would assume that the chair is not going to read it. That's sad, but they have already proven time and time again they're not going to, for whatever reason. They're overwhelmed. They're assigned teaching overload. You're not their student, and they had, you got picked up in their load or something like that. Or they just don't like to read. They just don't want to do it. They don't like your project. They don't want to read it. They don't like reading student work. There's many professors hiding out that have been doing this work for a long time, and they just don't like doing it anymore. So they sort of manage to not do it. And so there's a couple ways to do this. I like to play it that just assume the chair is overwhelmed. I try to view it in a very sympathetic lens and say, hey, it seems like we're having trouble managing to get feedback back. And you can say this a couple different ways. I think what I might say is, I know that you're probably totally overwhelmed this semester. What do you say that we have a meeting, we talk about what needs to happen in the meeting, and I can let you know that I've done it. We can talk through the changes that I've made using audio feedback or verbal feedback if we're going to do a face-to-face meeting. That lets the chair off the hook, because sometimes chairs like to talk to you about ideas. They just don't want to type it. They don't want to put it in comments or something like that. So sometimes a verbal meeting is the route to go. And you can even close the loop by saying, after this verbal meeting, where we talk through with the changes that I've made, if you're good with it, I'm going to go ahead and send it on to the other members of the committee so we can keep it moving. And sometimes the chair's fine with that. Surprisingly, even if it seems the chair's sort of a stall because they're just not reading the work, sometimes it's just laziness and they don't want to for some reason. So be that as it may, if they're overwhelmed with all kinds of other things, that's fine. That sometimes that doesn't hold you up, and you can go to the other members. And I like here to do some kind of an email where you say something to the effect that, oh, chair ABC and I have already been meeting and talked through the changes in this project. I've made those projects, with his or her permission, and we're going to go ahead and move forward. So I'm sending these chapters for your feedback. And sometimes the chair then feels like they checked a task off their list and is supportive. Not all chairs are like that. So the third scenario that I'm going to turn over is one where you just have a hostile chair for some reason. So the chair just doesn't like your ideas, keeps berating you. Every time you give them work, they tell you tons of negative things about it, and then your soul is destroyed. We have lots of clients that come to us for that because honestly, they need positive and encouraging feedback to work forward. So surprisingly, there's a couple strategies that you can do with this type of dissertation chair that's really, really hostile. In very, very extreme situations, I would encourage you to come to us, schedule a half-hour call, because there's plenty of dissertation chairs and administrators at Defend and Publish that work with us that do confidential help where they can talk about your individual scenario. So I don't want to just give blanket advice that you could throw out there. But let's just assume you have sort of a run-of-the-mill know-it-all dissertation chair, somebody hostile, somebody that's not, for whatever reason, they don't like your work and you just hate talking to them. I would really try to figure out a strategy to get out as fast as possible. And that might mean that you have to do some changes in your dissertation that you just don't want to do. And I just worked with a client. She was so unhappy about this piece of advice, but ultimately she did do it. And she's going to graduate. So she's going to actually finish this semester because it was one of those things where the chair had very definite ideas about what the student's dissertation should look like. She had been already fighting for 2 years to try to get her own things in there. And it was one of those things where it was just not going to happen. And ultimately, and this is the conversation that we had, was how much does this matter? And she ultimately decided that she wanted this dissertation to be this very fabulous pinnacle research of her career, but she was working on a really cool side project. And I said, if you think that just doing all the things your chair says will get you through, even if you have to kind of listen to, some negative feedback and so on, if you can work through and get through, you can work on this other side project and make that the pinnacle achievement. Because not everybody uses their dissertation as the major thing they did. I can't remember what episode I talked about this in, but my dissertation was on a very kind of flash in the pan, hot topic. I got one publication and a couple presentations out of it. I don't do anything with it anymore. It was a cool project at the time, and then I've already moved on. So, this doesn't, you don't have to have that for a dissertation necessarily. But that would be one way that you can do it. The other way that you can do this is, we talked about using a checklist. That's another way that sometimes helps with hostile chairs, where I would set up a meeting and say, okay, I know you're really not happy. I really want to make this work for both of us. And I really value your feedback, and kind of giving that positive spin, maybe a little ego stroke there. Again, see if you can get some very definite ideas of what needs to happen, and then again, show what needs to be there. These are not perfect solutions, but they are solutions that have worked with some of our clients just to get past the hump and keep moving with a project. I do know a fourth strategy. It is not one that I have recommended, but one of our clients came back and told us she's tried some of these other strategies in combination. But one of the things that she had mentioned was she also was very lucky to find a sympathetic committee member who was discreet and would not say anything. And so that sympathetic committee member was able to negotiate a little bit with the chair, just in a casual conversation where she just kind of asked about the work and what was happening. And, they kind of worked behind the scenes to sort of tag team what was happening with this problematic chair. That might be an option. It's not always an option, because sometimes you don't really know your second, third, fourth committee members very well, or the chair has already put them on your committee as allies or people that maybe you just don't feel comfortable going to. But I know in her case, that was also a workable strategy. So hopefully these give you some ideas. If you're dealing with a difficult dissertation situation, certainly come to us if you need anything. I am at Christine at defendandpublish.com. You can check that out if you want to look at that. I know too that we have talked about in previous episodes, just a couple episodes ago, about our new look for Defend and Publish coming up. We've already transitioned to Defend, Publish, and Lead. The podcast itself, it will be transitioning as well. And so all those things are coming in the future. So I will get them in as soon as we get them finished this semester, but they are still forthcoming. And I also want to just share with you my Textbook and Academic Authors Association resource of the day. And what it is actually the conference that they have. They're having their 35th conference this year. It is an online conference. I will be attending, and it is, I believe, June 9th and 10th. I kind of like what they're doing with this conference. I have gone to it before and I really, really enjoyed it. But I like what they're doing with it this time, where they have these very nice focus sessions. I know my most favorite thing that I saw in here, if you kind of look ahead to this preliminary schedule, but I love that they're opening their general session here with empowering joyful writing. I know we've talked about joyful writing and making writing pleasurable a lot on this podcast. I love that that is the opening, and the idea that you're participating in academic writing as something that you're learning and you're doing professional development for, because it's something that you want to enjoy and you want to get more out of it. There's plenty of other type sessions in here, and there's also lots of networking. So I would encourage you to go sign up. It's certainly an event that I think is really great here. If you take a look here, you can go ahead and check out how to join TAA, and you can see there's a little button over there that says events that you can check out, where you can see things about the conference. Also, don't forget our discount code. So if you look in the show notes, the discount code is there. I also have, if you need it, you can email me and I will give it to you. But you do get a discount for joining TAA because they are a partner with Defend and Publish. So hopefully this will help. As something that can do professional development for you this summer. And again, if you have questions or need help with a dissertation chair situation, come back to us. Happy writing.